Can aggression and a tendency for violent behaviour be passed down from parents to their children? Official science claims this isn't the case, though it does acknowledge the existence of a gene linked to various behavioural responses. American researchers have concluded that men carry a unique DNA variation, often referred to as the warrior gene, which can to varying degrees transform into what some call the crime gene. But what determines this degree? And could a son, without realising it, inherit a predisposition for violent crimes from his father? Genes are undoubtedly important and play a significant role, but it's essential not to blame everything on genetics. The brutal attack on young April Millsap, just 14 years old, shocked the small and peaceful town of Armada, Michigan. She had simply gone out to walk her dog, as she did every day, but she never made it back home. April Melissa Millsap was born on January 2nd, 2000, in the small town of St. Joseph, located in Berrien County, Michigan. She was the only child of Jennifer and Stephen Millsap. When April was just 6 years old, her parents divorced and she continued to live with her mother. Not long after, Jennifer began a relationship with a man named David Lichtenfeld. Their romance grew serious, and Jennifer, along with April, moved into David's home in the small rural community of Armada. A year later, Jennifer and David married. David became a father figure to April, treating her like his own daughter, and she started calling him Dad. The family seemed to be happy and well adjusted. Unfortunately, April remained an only child, as her mother's health prevented her from having more children. April grew up as a lively and outgoing young woman who had a wide circle of friends. She excelled in school, actively participated in sports, and demonstrated a natural talent for art. Despite her many talents, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because of her love for animals. She had a beloved Labrador retriever named Penny, and taking Penny for walks was a daily ritual. April always informed her parents about where she planned to go, who she would meet, and when she expected to return. She also stayed in constant contact with her family, and Jennifer could always reach her by phone. In middle school, April began dating a boy named Austin Johnson, who was a year older than her. The two spent most of their free time together, and their relationship was supported by their parents. However, by the spring of 2014, their bond seemed to have cooled, and they started seeing less of each other. On Thursday, July 24th, 2014, at around 5:30 p.m, April went for her usual walk with Penny. Their outings typically lasted about an hour, and Jennifer expected her daughter to be home by 6:30 p.m. for dinner. It's worth noting that Armada had one of the lowest crime rates in Michigan. With a population of less than 2,000, the town was considered a safe and peaceful place to live. So when April didn't return home at the expected time, Jennifer wasn't immediately alarmed. By 7 p.m, however, Jennifer tried calling her daughter, only to discover that her phone was turned off. This was unusual and concerning, but she tried to stay calm and not let her thoughts spiral. With summer break in full swing, Jennifer assumed her daughter might have met up with a friend, or possibly Austin. She called Austin, but he said he hadn't seen April that day. They had spoken on the phone earlier in the morning, but that was their only interaction. Growing increasingly worried, Jennifer began calling April's friends, but none of them had any idea where she might be. Tension was mounting when at around 8:30 p.m. someone knocked on the door. Jennifer felt a brief wave of relief, thinking her daughter had finally returned home, but it was Austin and his friend standing on the porch. The boys had been passing by and decided to check in to see if April had been found. It turned out they had also been searching for her, calling mutual friends and checking places where she usually walked in the evenings. Austin showed Jennifer a message April had sent him at around 6:20 p.m, but he hadn't noticed it until nearly an hour later. The text read, "I think someone just tried to kidnap me." Initially, Austin thought it was a strange joke, but when Jennifer called him shortly after to report that her daughter was missing, he became alarmed. Along with his friend, he began searching for her, but their efforts that evening turned up nothing. None of April's friends had seen or heard from her. By this time, David had returned home from work. When he learned about his stepdaughter's disappearance, he wasted no time organising a search. With Jennifer, Austin, and a few of April's friends, they retraced her usual walking route, calling anyone she might have visited and stopping passers-by to ask if they'd seen her. At 9:45 p.m, Jennifer and David went to the local police station to report April as missing. While Jennifer, David and Austin searched the familiar paths April often took, a married couple jogging in a wooded area about 1.5 miles from the Millsap home stumbled upon something unusual. They were on a trail when they spotted a Labrador with a leash still attached but no owner in sight. The dog appeared distressed, whining and darting away before turning back as if trying to lead the couple somewhere. The couple decided to follow the dog. It ran a few yards ahead, pausing to ensure they were keeping up, then led them off the trail and through some bushes. About 30 feet in, they came to a small ravine. Looking down, they saw the lifeless body of a young woman. Her clothing was in disarray, and the scene was deeply unsettling. They immediately contacted law enforcement. At that moment, Jennifer and David were still at the police station, desperately trying to get help to find April. Armada, a quiet town with fewer than 2,000 residents, had a police force of just 2 officers who had never handled anything more serious than minor thefts or vandalism. When news of a violent crime came in, they quickly reached out to neighbouring jurisdictions for assistance from more experienced forensic experts. The body discovered in the ravine belonged to a young woman, lying on her back with injuries covering nearly every part of her. Her blouse was torn, her lower clothing and underwear had been completely removed, and her shoes were found several feet away. Evidence initially suggested an attempt at an assault with intent, but this was later ruled out. It was clear, however, that the victim fought back fiercely, and her resistance likely enraged the attacker, leading to her death. Her head, face and neck had been brutally crushed. On her skin were unusual marks that forensic experts initially struggled to identify. Later, they determined that the marks were from the sole of a large shoe, matching impressions found in the dirt nearby. The assailant had, quite literally, stomped on the victim's body, crushing her throat. Defensive wounds were found on her hands, indicating she fought desperately to survive, but the odds were against her. The medical examiner also identified numerous injuries consistent with being struck by a blunt object, although the specific weapon could not yet be determined. Bruises and abrasions covered her body, evidence that she had been relentlessly beaten, stomped on, and subjected to unimaginable torment. Who could commit such an atrocious act? There was little doubt that the body belonged to April Millsap, the young woman who had gone missing that evening. Witnesses were led to the scene by her dog Penny, who had stayed near her owner's body. April's parents identified her by her clothing, earrings and a birthmark on her shoulder. Jennifer, overwhelmed by grief, required immediate medical attention as she nearly suffered a heart attack from the shock. Jennifer, David and Austin were brought to the police station for questioning as investigators attempted to piece together the timeline of that tragic evening and narrow down possible suspects. April's devastated parents insisted that their daughter had no enemies and that no one in her life could be capable of such cruelty. Jennifer and David were quickly ruled out as suspects. Both had solid alibis and no conceivable motive. Austin, April's boyfriend, drew greater suspicion due to his uneasy demeanour. The young man admitted that he and April had been dating for about a year, but had grown distant recently, with tension building in their relationship. During summer break, they hadn't been seeing each other as frequently, though they stayed in touch through calls and messages on social media. In reality, the couple was on the verge of breaking up. Austin showed officers the concerning message April had sent him, stating that someone had tried to kidnap her. However, he hadn't reacted to it, didn't notify law enforcement, and failed to contact April's parents, which raised suspicions. He claimed he didn't see the message immediately, and upon reading it, assumed it was a joke or an attempt to get his attention. It wasn't until Jennifer called him to report her daughter missing that Austin and his friend decided to join the search. Austin admitted that he and April had argued the day before, though he couldn't clearly explain why. He insisted that April had initiated the conflict and mentioned that her behaviour had been unusual recently. This admission only heightened the suspicions of investigators, who decided to detain him to verify his alibi. According to Austin, he had been at home playing video games until about 4 p.m. He then went to a friend's house to help with car repairs. The two worked on the vehicle for about an hour and a half, a timeline corroborated by neighbours who had seen them in the driveway. Afterward, the pair decided to grab a meal at a local cafe. Surveillance footage from the cafe confirmed they were there when Jennifer called Austin to ask about April. It was only after this call that Austin noticed April's earlier message. Despite the unsettling content, he didn't immediately grasp the severity of the situation. When Jennifer called again, more distressed, Austin and his friend began searching the usual paths where April walked her dog. After finding no sign of her, they decided to check at her home. Piecing together the timeline and evidence, investigators concluded that Austin could not have been near the victim at the time of the attack, effectively clearing him as a suspect. Not long after, one of April's close friends brought in for questioning provided an intriguing lead. She mentioned that April had recently been spending time with a boy named Roger, a known troublemaker at school and an aspiring athlete. According to the friend, Roger had shown a romantic interest in April and had expressed jealousy over her relationships with others. Roger was promptly brought in for questioning, and investigators examined his phone. It revealed frequent, flirtatious exchanges with April, suggesting a budding romantic connection. Given his athletic build and imposing stature, investigators considered him a potential suspect, capable of overpowering April during a jealous outburst. However, it didn't take long to uncover a solid alibi for Roger on the evening of the crime. With no evidence tying him to the scene, authorities had no choice but to release him and rule him out as a suspect. News of the brutal crime involving April spread rapidly throughout the small town, sparking widespread panic and rumours of a predator in the area. People grew afraid to leave their homes and kept their loved ones close, reluctant to let anyone walk alone. The local news covered April's case, urging anyone who had seen or heard something unusual that evening to come forward. Not long after, a young woman called the police with information. She reported seeing a suspicious white van driving slowly down her street at around 4:30 p.m. The van caught her attention because it was moving at walking speed, which seemed odd. As it approached her house, she glanced out the window and noticed two men inside. The van stopped briefly in front of her home. The driver gestured and said something, pointing towards her, while the passenger stared at her intently. Feeling uneasy about the entire situation, she decided to keep watching until the van moved on. When she later learned about the crime that evening, she immediately contacted law enforcement. The police suspected that the men in the van might have been searching for a victim and eventually crossed paths with April while she was out walking her dog. Determined to find the men and the vehicle, investigators worked with the witness to create a description of the van and composite sketches of the men inside. This information was shared during the evening news broadcast, with authorities requesting help from the public to identify and locate them. The following day, something unexpected happened. The men in the white van voluntarily came to the police station to give their statements. They turned out to be repair workers from a nearby town who were in the area to fix a cable issue. They explained that they had gotten lost while trying to locate a house on a parallel street and had stopped in front of the witness's home to check the address. After verifying their story, investigators cleared them of any involvement and released them. 2 days later, another witness contacted the police with new information. The man reported seeing a young woman walking her dog on a leash, accompanied by a man pushing a motorcycle alongside him. They appeared to be chatting casually as they walked. The man noted that the interaction didn't seem alarming. There was no indication that the young woman was distressed or being coerced. Everything about the scene suggested it was simply a stroll. When a news segment aired detailing the horrific crime involving April, including her photo, a witness realised he might have seen the perpetrator that evening. He provided a detailed description of the man, his clothing, and a distinctive white and blue motorcycle he had never seen in Armada before. When investigators showed the composite sketch to April's parents and friends, none of them recognised the man. They insisted they had never seen him before, and he wasn't part of April's circle. The suspect appeared to be around 35 years old, far too old to have been a friend or acquaintance of April's. Based on the witness's testimony, He'd seen the man and April together shortly before she sent the chilling message about a possible abduction attempt. It seemed likely that after being alone with April and ensuring no witnesses were nearby, the attacker made his move. April managed to break free and send her desperate text for help. Thanks to the description of the motorcycle and its distinctive colour scheme, the vehicle was located on July 27th, outside a local resident's home. The man was immediately detained and taken to the station, where the witness was called in for identification. However, the witness stated that this was not the man he had seen with April. The detained man explained that the motorcycle belonged to his friend, a 32-year-old named James Van Callis, who lived in Goodell's, Michigan, about 20 miles from Armada. The next day, July 28th, 2014, officers knocked on Van Callis's door to question him about his whereabouts 4 days earlier. Van Callis appeared calm and cooperative, explaining that he had visited a friend in Armada and stayed there for the evening and overnight. His friend corroborated the story, but the account seemed shaky and unconvincing. Detectives requested the clothing and shoes Van Callis had worn during his visit. He handed over a pair of sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt. Forensic analysis revealed no incriminating evidence on the items, and the sole pattern on the sneakers didn't match the impressions found on April's body or at the crime scene. Despite feeling certain Van Callis was hiding something, investigators had no concrete evidence to detain him further. Investigators decided to take a closer look at James Van Callis Jr.'s background. It was soon revealed that he had a history of minor offences, including burglary, possession of illegal substances, and failing to pay child support. However, he had no prior record of violent crimes. In contrast, his father, James Van Callis Sr., had a far more serious criminal history. He had served 2 lengthy prison sentences, one for assault and another for an egregious act involving a minor. His most recent conviction, which resulted in a 10-year prison sentence, involved violence of an intimate nature against a young girl. Van Callis Sr. had been released from prison about a year before April's case and was living at the family home with his wife and son. Detectives also began investigating Van Callis Sr., but the witness confidently ruled him out, stating that the man he saw with April was much younger. However, when shown Van Callis Jr., the witness immediately identified him as the man who had been walking with April that evening. A search of the Van Callis home uncovered an illegal operation. James Jr. and his father had been growing banned plants in the basement with the intent to sell. Both men were arrested and brought in for questioning. This ensured that the suspect would not flee while investigators worked to build a case against him. All the shoes in the Van Callis home were examined, but none matched the tread pattern found on April's body and at the scene. Investigators concluded that the suspect had likely disposed of the incriminating footwear. Similarly, testing James Jr.'s clothing revealed no evidence. There were no bloodstains or DNA traces from the victim. As for the motorcycle, it had been thoroughly cleaned with harsh chemicals, clearly in an effort to destroy any potential evidence. At this point, a new witness came forward, James Jr.'s girlfriend, Christine. She described him as a cruel and aggressive individual, prone to violent outbursts. She revealed that he had physically assaulted her on several occasions and expressed her belief that he was capable of attacking someone like April. According to Christine, James Jr. had a particular interest in much younger girls, mirroring the disturbing tendencies of his father. Christine also mentioned a specific pair of sneakers James Jr. was particularly fond of, black and white Jordan brand shoes. On the evening of July 24th, she returned home to find him frantically trying to clean these sneakers, growing increasingly angry when he couldn't get them spotless. She also noticed him scrubbing his motorcycle and helmet with strong-smelling chemicals. After that evening, she never saw the sneakers again. However, Christine provided investigators with photos of James wearing them from his social media accounts. Using these photos, police identified the model and brand of the shoes, obtained an identical pair, and confirmed that the tread pattern matched the prints left on April's body. Unfortunately, this evidence was considered circumstantial and wouldn't be strong enough to hold up in court. investigators needed more to solidify their case. James Van Callis's personal computer was seized as part of the investigation, and what law enforcement discovered was both disturbing and incriminating. First, they found an extensive collection of illegal explicit material featuring underage girls stored on his hard drive. Possession of such material is a serious crime in itself, and it was clear that the suspect had been collecting it for years, indicating a troubling fixation on young teens. Second, a recovered browser history revealed that Van Callis frequently searched for content on how to approach and gain the trust of younger girls. He had also been reading articles and watching videos on pickup techniques and ways to charm and manipulate. Third, investigators uncovered evidence of his social media interactions with underage girls. These conversations included compliments and attempts to invite them on dates, further highlighting his unhealthy and unlawful interests. After an extensive search, April's phone was found about half a mile from the crime scene, lying in tall grass by the roadside. It had clearly been discarded by the perpetrator. Although the phone was turned off, it was undamaged, allowing investigators to retrieve its data. One crucial piece of evidence was a fitness app installed on the device. The app tracked April's steps and movement speed, offering insight into her final moments. About 2 minutes before she sent the ominous message to her boyfriend, her pace suddenly increased significantly. This suggested she was trying to flee from someone while typing her plea for help. Immediately after sending the message, April turned and began running in the opposite direction. It appeared she had tried to escape, but was likely blocked by her pursuer. Within a minute, her movement stopped abruptly. This coincided with the location of the ravine where the attack occurred, the same place where April fought desperately for her life. 15 minutes later, the fitness app recorded a sudden burst of speed, reaching about 30 miles per hour. The data indicated the device was now moving along the trail, consistent with someone riding a motorcycle. Shortly after, the phone came to a stop again, and the signal disappeared. It seemed the perpetrator had taken the phone, turned it off, and discarded it in the bushes after driving a short distance. When investigators examined the geolocation data from Van Callis's own phone, it placed him near the crime scene at the exact time of the attack, directly contradicting his alibi of being at a friend's house. This evidence, combined with the findings on his computer, was enough to formally charge Van Callis with the brutal crime and proceed with the case in court. Despite the substantial amount of evidence collected, much of it was circumstantial, which worked in favour of the suspect and his defence. No DNA from James Van Callis was found at the crime scene or on April's body, and none of her DNA was detected on his belongings. In court, Van Callis claimed he had washed his motorcycle and helmet because they were stained with motor oil during repairs. He also stated that his sneakers, the same brand and model linked to the crime, had torn months earlier and he had discarded them. However, the prosecution presented evidence that Van Callis had been photographed wearing those sneakers just a week before the crime. Forensic experts further testified that the injuries on April's body were consistent with being struck by a motorcycle helmet, matching the size and shape of Van Callis's gear. Throughout the investigation and trial, James refused to cooperate with authorities and adamantly denied any involvement. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the circumstantial case against him was overwhelming. The jury deliberated briefly before unanimously finding Van Callis guilty of the brutal crime, including attempted abduction and assault. In the summer of 2016, James Van Callis Jr. was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. All of his appeals were unsuccessful. To this day, he maintains his innocence and has shown no remorse for the crime.